Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, hold your applause till we're done, please. For those of you that don't know me, for those of you that weren't at our board meeting this morning, my name is Harlan Fisher. I have the honor and privilege of being the president of the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass for the year 2012 and 2013, and then they'll probably kick me out by then. But in any case, it's a thrill to see you all here during this 50th anniversary year of contemporary art glass in the United States. In 1962, the Beatles had their first hit in the United States,
Right.
Love Me Do. So it's been a long time. And Telstar was a satellite that created the whole international communication system that we just take for granted today. It never existed before. Sadly, it was also the year that Marilyn Monroe passed away. But we fondly remember her and the wind blowing. But in any case, 1962 was 50 years ago. It was the start of the glass movement in the United States, and we have a great panel to talk about that today. Just for those of you that aren't members of the Art Alliance, I just happen to have some applications here, which I'll be more than happy to pass out to you before you go. But we're a great organization of over 600 members of collectors and gallery owners and curators and museums, and we love glass and artists. But that's enough about that. I want to introduce my friend Tina Oldknow, who's going to be your moderator for this panel. Tina has been the curator of modern glass at the Corning Museum of Glass since the year 2000. Prior to her tenure at Corning, she was with the LA County Museum of Art, the J. Paul Getty, and other museums, including the Seattle Art Museum. She is a prolific author. Her latest publication was Voices of Contemporary Glass, the Heinemann Collection in 2009. And if you haven't been to Corning to see the Heinemann Collection, it's worth a trip from just about any place for that. Currently, she edits the museum's annual New Glass Review with Richard Price. Tina has a BA in Art History from UCLA and an MA in Art History from Penn. She is a member of the International Council of Pilchuck Glass School. So without any further ado, Tina.
Thanks, Harlan. Thank you, Harlan. And I wanted to really thank the AACG and especially David Den for organizing these panels. And also, I have to really acknowledge David for the incredible work he's done in encouraging museums and galleries across the country to have special exhibitions during the 50th anniversary year. So can we all give him... I know how difficult that work was, and he really went after it and did such a great job. So thank you, David. Today we were instructed not to have any slides, no slides to distract you, no beautiful artwork, no fascinating things, just us, a motley crew, and people I know well.
Motley Crue?
Speak for
Yeah.
yourself.
And this will be hopefully the tenor of our conversation so if we're interrupting each other and asking questions of each other, don't think that's weird. That's what we'd like to do if we can possibly do it today. So I'll briefly introduce each of our panels for those of you who don't know them. Right next to me is Marvin Lepofsky. And may I say that these bios I'm reading for the first time, they were compiled by the AACG, and I'm very... Yes? Is that a question? No? Are you sure?
Well, most of the things that they've sent out to museums aren't correct, so go ahead.
That starts us off on the right leg there.
It really does. Because I think, and one of the things I learned when I was writing the book about Pilchuck Glass School was that history never can be objective. It is subjective. And everyone has a different perspective on it. There is no one perspective. And actually, that's what makes it so interesting, because I love it when you make that face.
False
That's his
history.
face all the
It's
time.
very American to have false history.
Okay, so Marvin, I think, is someone who really took up Harvey Littleton's kind of suggestion that you go out and teach in universities. And he is someone who established a very important program at the University of California, Berkeley, at the California College of Art, formerly Arts and Crafts, in Oakland. He has been an incredible teacher. He has traveled the world. He has documented through his photographs 50 years of studio glass, and I'm proud to say that his photo archive is in the collection of the Ray Cow Research Library at the Corning Museum. And it's really an incredible document of a pretty extraordinary time. And Marvin's been incredibly influential as a teacher, but also as someone who has built a very successful career as an independent artist. Mary Schaffer, and I'm completely not even going through these bios because, I don't really have to. Mary Schaffer is someone who I have really had so much respect for as a woman early on in studio glass, trying, as all the people who are sitting here, to really make glass a medium for sculpture. And I think that this is incredibly important. They were really pioneers in each of their own ways, developing their own techniques, trying to get glass to a new place. For someone like me who studies the material, seeing what they have done and the incredible, amazing developments that they have spent their careers doing, it's awesome and it's extraordinary, and I have such great respect for each of you. Jack Smith, very well-known artist from Toledo, and Joel Myers, now from Marietta, Pennsylvania. Again, teachers and people who have really, even if they didn't mean to, mentored younger artists and helped them along. So with that introduction, wonderful artists here with us and in the next panel as well, which I hope you stay for. The AACG got together and polled their members and asked them to submit questions of what they would like to hear some of these artists talk about, which I thought was a great idea. For one thing, I didn't have to do any work. That was good. But they were really good questions. And so the first one I think is really important because when you're a pioneer and you're kind of making history, and I know that when you're in the middle of making history, you don't think of it that way. You're just doing your thing or whatever. You also have to be, there are people whose shoulders you stand on. And a lot of the times we always think of these are the people whose shoulders everyone else stands on. Who are some of the shoulders they stood on? So my first question will be, and we'll start with Marvin, what were some of the most important influences on your development as an artist, and who, if anyone, were your mentors in doing what you did?
My mother and father.
Okay.
You can't go any further back than that. Except their mothers and fathers.
But would you say there was something specific that they did?
Yeah, they were very accepting. They were, grew up in a small town. My parents were very active in the community. At least they tried to be.
Were they artists?
No,
Didn't it bother them or make them a little worried?
absolutely not.
Oh, that's unusual.
No, it's not.
No? I have found that. All right, how about you, Jeff?
They're
Well, it's interesting. The first person he brings up is his parents because I come from a blue-collar family. My father did just about everything, I guess, and could do about anything. He was a Renaissance man, is what I like to think of. But I never really thought he had much appreciation for the arts. And unbeknownst to me, because as a young boy I liked to draw, and we did a lot of things at the museum in Toledo, which is a fabulous museum. Unbeknownst to me, my father was sort of nudging me in that direction. And so it was, I learned this later on in life, and it felt really good to know that he could see that happening with me and not really be too involved in the arts himself. I mean, he liked looking at Michelangelo and all the classics and so forth, but he saw me painting pictures and drawing and doing things, and sort of gave me that direction. But I had a little peer group with me as a young man as well that we all sort of had similar interests, and so that
But,
helped.
so are you telling me that looking at artworks as you were growing up, or any of your teachers were not an influence on you at all?
No, not saying that at all. No, that's just, as Marvin was suggesting, that's where I got started, was that nudge. But I was always interested in the arts, and I was interested in high school. And I think when you talk about mentors, I mean, when you're in college and you're looking at all the classics, and then the AbX movement to me was a very significant, important part of my education. I mean, I like all those guys that were working in that period of time. And it wasn't until I met Fritz Dreisbach that I started thinking seriously about glass. So I had been working in glass prior to meeting Fritz, which was how I got involved with him. But there's a list of mentors then that follow that. So there's
But all of you, except for Mary, is that true, began working in ceramics? Is that true, Marvin, for you?
I didn't begin working in ceramics. I began as a graphic designer. And I came to that completely naive in terms of what I knew about art in some ways. Fortunately, I was rescued by Parsons School of Design that I really feel helped mold my career in some ways. And I look back to that time as being an incredibly formative time for me. So I came at it from one point of view. And I was inspired when I was working as a designer in New York City by what I saw at the time. And I've spoken about this before, but in 1950s, in spite of what we know about the 50s in certain ways, it was a very exciting time for the field that I was in. And also was a time when Scandinavian design was at its foremost and was presented to the world in New York City and some particular places. And that inspired me to think about doing something completely different, which was ceramics. I mean, I saw the ceramics, and when you think back to those times and you wonder what your motivation was, and I can see it so clearly now, it was such a pure motivation based upon the beauty of what I saw and how I related that to what I was doing as a designer, where there was seemingly, at that time in my career, which was 3 years into my career, that I needed something more personal. I needed something that I could identify as my own, something that was mine and not I didn't have to share with half a dozen, 2 dozen other designers. And as I say, looking back, your perception of things is much sharper now, and so I wonder, those decisions I made, I really wonder at how good they were and how intuitive they were.
And for me, my mentors, I had 3 great mentors in high school. They were an Austrian, a German, and a Swiss. They were all painters. And the German woman, actually, which is interesting because I grew up in Europe, they don't have any prejudice against crafts. So she was a painter, but she taught us how to do printmaking, how to make books, how to do batik, how to make patterns for clothes, how to sew gloves. So there was no prejudice ever when I was growing up about the craft. And actually, so I exhibited my paintings. I wanted to be a painter from the age of 7, and studied it and planned on it. So in the 60s, I wasn't working with glass. I was painting and exhibiting these paintings. And it wasn't until the 70s, actually, that when Fritz Dreisbach was teaching at RISD, and Toots and Thurman were students, that he sort of in the winter, I tell a story about you, Fritz, I'm not going to tell now because you're in the room.
Oh, no, tell it.
But no, it's not fair. But but in any case, when he
Would you like to
moved
tell it?
into the, he doesn't know. When he moved into the basement, that was my studio, and he saw these undulating surfaces I was making because I was fascinated with windows, and he said. And then he saw some little reverse paintings on glass based on Kokoschka. So he said, well, why don't you try bending glass? And I said, well, how do you do that? He said, well, I think they use sand. But it was really, and then Toots was a student, and so was Thurman, and Toots helped regulate the kilns, and Thurman actually stole a kiln from RISD and gave it to me for my birthday, and that was like the pivotal thing, because every time I went into my painting studio, I made a little piece, so I got to observe the slumping and the bending every day, because it only took 3 minutes in that little test kiln, to make a piece, and those were the pieces that informed my work. But my mentors were very, very important to me, and it really had to do with the art world, not my family.
And I'd like to come back to Marvin for a minute, because Marvin was the only person here who worked with Harvey at Madison, and I'd love to hear more beyond the parents about where you were coming out of, Marvin.
Well, I was about to tell you, but I got interrupted.
Well, it'll happen again.
They warned you at the beginning. Yeah, it was an exciting time. I first went to the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana and studied industrial design. I was interested in three-dimensional things and so forth, and that was the closest I could come to that it was a legitimate subject. And it was a very good experience, and I experienced a lot of three-dimensional people, sculptors, and looked at a lot of paintings and so forth, besides the design aspect of my studies. And then by accident, I was encouraged to go to the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and where my first class was a ceramics class, because I had seen some work by Peter Volkus and John Mason at the Art Institute here, and thought that I'd like to work with clay. It was exciting to me. I really saw something in their work. And so I was the last student to enter the classroom, the studio, and this little short guy was in front of all the students, and he said, "Who are you?" And, I was late because I couldn't find my way around the school. And he said, "Are you married?" And I didn't answer. He said, looked at the girls. He said to the girls, "If you learn how to make good soup, you'll find a husband." And that was my introduction to Harvey Littleton. Afterwards, he said, "Do you want to blow glass?" I said, "I don't know. I'm a sculptor. I don't know." I was just starting graduate school, and that was the time that he was starting to gather his graduate students to blow glass for the very first time in the States. I became part of that group, and very naively, I didn't know, but I kind of liked it. And we had a studio that was the first studios that they used were at his farm, in his garage, and then they built a studio in the university, near the university campus, and it was a big warehouse, and it was nice to bring girls there and show them how to blow glass and things like that. It was very impressive, but continued my sculptural work and so forth. So glass was just something secondary. But at that time, we didn't know anything. I remember opening the first kiln, the first oven, where everybody blew glass, and in the bottom of the oven were all these little, pardon the turds. And nobody knew whose was whose. And they started arguing with each other. Who made what? They didn't know. And they didn't look like anything special, and that's how this movement started in the States.
It all started with the furnace and with blowing. I think that's a very important thing to recognize, because today things have changed a great deal. And we see, actually, even though glass blowing itself is so exciting, and since it's a kind of performance, it attracts a lot of a big audience, but it's really not really what's happening with glass today.
What's
But it's
happening with
interesting.
glass
I
today?
remember, I maybe finished a little bit here, Marvin. I remember seeing the first works of Marvin. And what did strike me about him was that even though the glass looked pretty marbly,
It was.
the work was sculptural. I mean, it had an attempt to create form that went beyond the traditional kind of blown vessel symmetry and so forth. And that was what excited me about the work of some of the young people, even Marvin when he was young, that they were exploring glass in a way that, as I was a designer at a glass factory and learning how to blow glass,
At Blanco.
that was a big difference for me to see. And actually, when I was invited for the first time to go there in '65, I believe it was. I mean, Marvin wasn't there then, but other people were there, and it really was a real eye opener for me in so many ways. Realizing that at the glass factory I had fantastic glass, where they were working with like thick molasses, and they were doing something with it. But that the enthusiasm, I would invite as many people as I could to come down to the factory to learn. And Marvin was one of the first people that came, and actually was the first time he ever blew glass in the factory. I had worked there. So, I mean, I think to understand what was going on, they were all learning about, I mean, Harvey didn't know how to blow glass either. And they were just learning how to work with the material in the way that it was presented to them without thinking about, the next steps. And they did find a way, of course.
And I sort of want to say, you said I was trying to make glass into sculpture. I wasn't trying. I just made stuff, and it was sculptural because I wasn't blowing glass. I was bending and putting things together. I think in '74 I had a show in New York City, and it was a 6-foot-long piece. Which had nothing to do with blowing. It had to do with fusing tubes together and
So,
using light.
But actually working with flat glass and making sculptural things and being a woman, did you feel, and our story of Harvey Littleton about the suit making, did you feel that it was very hard for you to break into glass?
No, there was no breaking into. It just, I was
Did you feel
fascinated.
supported by?
Very, in fact, by both these men, because probably, my work was being published in some little glass magazine or something, or a stained glass magazine. I don't know how they found out about my work, but both of them invited me to their schools, to speak. I don't remember, we're trying to figure out which year.
72 or 73.
Yeah, very, very, oh, you can't hear me? Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, just speak up if you can't hear.
Yeah, if you can't hear me, please speak up, because I love being heard. But anyhow, yeah, these two were very supportive. Marvin got me out twice, and Joel got me out, to do a workshop. It was fantastic. I mean, the glass world was extremely supportive. I didn't feel like I had to break into anything. And glass as itself was so responsive to my ideas of the time that it was just a sort of a perfect fit for my philosophy.
What I saw in your work was a new avenue of exploration, rather than just blowing. And that's why what interested me was that I was thinking as a teacher, that where we're going, in that sense, is it all just about blowing? And I knew it wasn't, because I knew that there were great potential beyond just blowing. And when I saw what you're doing, it really, I thought it was great, and I wanted to expose my students. And eventually, I did have some students work on ideas that were not blown. Yeah.
So by the mid-'70s, when things, the glass movement's over 10 years old, you're beginning to have shows everywhere. Marvin has already started his program. There's a lot going on. What did you think might be the history, the future for glass at that time?
You asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking all of you, any one of you who would
I'll
like to
answer it.
reply to that.
In 1975, I thought I'd be sitting on a panel discussing the first 50 years of studio glass movement. Now, you don't believe that, do you? In 1975, I was struggling to build a program at a small state school, 20,000, not so small, but in any event. And the amazing thing is that I wasn't thinking about the future at all. I was thinking about what I was doing and how I could benefit my students, how I could benefit myself in terms of what I was learning, and how I could improve my own skills and understanding of what the potential of glass was. Believe me, I had no idea of where glass was going, and I wasn't concerned about that. I just believed that this was going somewhere, because why would I be doing what I'm doing and spending my life and passion on something that had no future? And the idea of a future is, I find very interesting, because what if you ask someone today that's a 20-year-old kid and somebody that's in college, and what's the future of glass? What do you think they're going to say? Of course there's a future of glass. Here it is. You have galleries, and you have museums, and you have a public that's interested, and we didn't have that. But we believed it would be so.
Well, I think that some of that we did have then, because I know after Fritz drug me away from my lucrative job teaching, that I traveled with Fritz, and we went to a lot of universities. And I was thinking about this last night when we were at this rather sophisticated studio on the other side of town. The same energy level was there when we did those workshops. It was just a much smaller group. I mean, everybody was cranked up and excited, and of course we partied pretty heavily, so that helped drive the whole thing. But I mean, it's just like the whole thing is just, the same thing is just expanded and expanded and expanded. And the excitement, enthusiasm then was just as great as it is today.
But what you have to bring into play here is, for example, the formation of Glass Art Society in 1971, the communication that existed between people in terms of sharing their ideas. This is one great idea of the glass field, is how they shared, and their enthusiasm and all of that kind of, which built up.
Right, right.
So-
Well,
so-
it opened up, too. It opened up information, it opened up techniques, it let us kind of get other people's ideas mixed in
But
with ours.
I'd also like to ask Marvin, for example, how did you sell the University of California on not only starting a glass program, but keeping it open? Because I know, because we see this over and over, university programs love to get rid of glass. It's expensive, and you know, it's the first thing that often will go in an art department. So I'm just kind of wondering, what was it, do you think? And I know that, you know, people were talking about you created a lot of excitement about glass. What were some of the things that you were telling people?
I think it was just my winning personality that
You mean because
Just
they were
blew-
scared of you?
blew
They
them
were just
over.
like, don't bother with that guy?
no, I was hired by a weaver, Ed Rossback, who was to teach in the decorative arts department at the university, who had had Pete Volkus teaching there, and quite other assembled luminaries in their fields. And I don't know. They eventually kicked us out, but that was economics.
It always is.
Yeah. We had a great program, and we were in the College of Environmental Design with architecture and city planning and things like that, and landscape design. So we had a wealth of students who were really interested and were professional. They all had something else that they were doing, and they blew glass too. Then, of course, people came in like Richard Marquis and Paula Bartran. You bring up the subject of women, and there was never any discrimination that I saw or felt. My first class were 6 girls, and we built a furnace and started blowing glass in 1964-5. They didn't know anything, and we did it. My 2 assistants at the 2 schools were women at California and at CCAC. We didn't bother with that other stuff. I've heard from other people how people didn't like women or discriminated, but it still goes on today. I mean, that's just life. And not just in the United States. And I asked Mary, if things were so open, how did all those books and religious articles get burned and destroyed in Germany and the other countries? What happened to that openness and freedom. And I have a different story and vision of history than that. You know, it's how you perceive what you perceive. And Joel is sort of the odd person here because he started as a designer. And
Very odd.
What?
Very odd.
I couldn't hear what he
He
said.
said very odd. Very
Very
odd.
odd. Well, yeah, no, and we knew about Joel because we met him in '64 at the World Congress of Craftsmen in New York City, and he was interested in things. Other people were too. At that conference, Tapio Warkala came up to me in front of the furnace that Nick Labino built and sent to New York for demonstrations, and gave me his card and said, "Don't do this. Go to the factory and tell them Tapio sent you." And I said, that was incredible. I didn't believe him. I mean, I didn't take that information. And a number of years later, I did a seminar, Lassi Seminari, in Finland, in Helsinki, and his son was in my class.
How did you talk CCA into giving you the money to build the first furnace?
I didn't.
How did that happen?
I didn't talk to them. There was a woman there, another weaver, Trudy Goman Prey, a wonderful woman, who came to the States through Europe just before the war, and she's heard what we were doing at Berkeley, and she wanted to start something. So one summer they had a workshop. I think American Craft Council gave them $300 for the workshop. You know, people you don't have to talk if you do it. If you're doing it, if it's active, you don't have to recruit students.
Right.
They will come.
Yeah.
And what year did you start?
71. I
Yeah.
mean, 71. But I do have a story about RISD.
Can I finish?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, by 71, man, I'd been to Europe and several times, and all kinds of things were going on. There was nothing. It was just breaking. Every year the progress keep opening up. And Joel was part of all that. He went to some of the early seminars in Switzerland, and something that that we participated in.
In
Go ahead, you can talk about it.
Okay,
Go ahead.
thank you. Thank you. That's one of the things that's part of this picture, is that in 1972, what Marvin's talking about is this conference, the first real conference of Europeans and I guess it was only, I'm going to say Europeans and Americans, but I could be wrong. No, I think probably English maybe were there too. But this was a fantastic conference held in Zurich, Switzerland, and sponsored by the Museum Bellerive, Dr. Erika Billiter and Roberto Niederer, who was a businessman doing lamp glass blowing. And they had this was a fantastic conference. It was the first time I met one of my heroes, was Erik Höglund, the glass designer at Boda, and to me one of the greatest Swedish designers. And I met him at a time when all of us were enthusiastic about glass. He had spent 20 years and he was tired. And he was represented in the exhibition in the museum by a bunch of slumped goblets, which really told you very much about where he was. But then, in 72, and then in 75, Dr. Ohm of the Museum for Kunsthandwerk in Frankfurt, Germany, had a Modernist glass exhibition, a marvelous, big exhibition of European and Asian art, glass art. And she came to the Glass Art Society meeting in Corning, New York, I've forgotten, I was president, but I forgot what it was. But she came and drove me to my house all the way in Illinois, and we discussed this exhibition. And that was one thing. And then in 75, the Hot Glass Conference in London, which was fantastic. I mean, these are things that have been causing all of this interest.
But Joel, all of you, one of the things I was reading recently was about Liza Liu, the woman who works with
About-
beads. Liza Liu,
Yes.
she's an artist who works with beads. She'd studied painting at San Francisco Art Institute, and she had visited Venice and seen the very densely decorated cathedrals, loved it, came back, discovered beads, started putting them in her paintings. Her professors were horrified. She ended up dropping out of school because she thought, if I upset this many people, it must be a good thing. And did anyone in these kind of early days ever come up to you and say, please reconsider what you're doing? What is this?
I just told you,
Ever-
Tapio Werkele told me not to do
Yeah.
what we were doing.
And did you ever
And he
have
was the
anything else?
most famous at that
Yeah.
time
He
designer
was-
in the world.
He was one of my heroes.
And very
He was one of my heroes, too.
open, and, worked in many materials. Yeah,
Okay, well, my turn.
okay.
Your turn.
Take
All right. So, no, what I want to answer on several different levels because I didn't answer your question, but I also want to mention that I'm staying with a man who was head of the art department at the Art Institute in Chicago, and he told me this morning that in 1967, Norm Schulman took a couple of graduate students and they built a hot furnace on the farm belonging to Honeybell. So RISD sort of had, just as you said, Marvin, it happened. They didn't talk him into it or anything. They just built a furnace on the farm and in 67, and then that became, later the glass shop. That's how it happened at RISD. But also, I wanted to say that you said in 1975, what did we think of the future of glass? And Barbara Lee Diamonstein interviewed me for a book a couple of years later and asked the same question, what is the future of glass? And the answer I gave back then is still the answer I give now, is that glass as a material will be incorporated into art making, and that the schools are really, really important for it because they teach, the techniques and some of the ideas, but that it will just be part of the continuum of art making. And the thing that I did not see in those early years in 1975 was that we would have an amazing collector base, that we would have collectors. We weren't thinking about selling work. We were experimenting and expressing ourselves and our emotions and our ideas. So to have this amazing collector base, all of you out there who have supported our work, allowed us to make work, supported the schools. I mean, that's what I didn't see back then, and that's the difference. But in terms of, was it difficult or did people tell you not to do it? No, it was just an energy, as they talk about.
But it was Corning's exhibition at the end of the
Yes.
70s
1979.
that really started the real collecting base.
Right.
They're the ones, that's what really put the stamp of approval.
But what do you think of the Toledo Glass Nationals then in that regard?
So-
The Toledo
Yeah.
Glass Nationals
Were
were
very important.
Yeah.
But
because
it's interesting how few people know about them.
You got
I
to be from
think-
Toledo.
I think what had happened with Glass 1979 is it traveled to major art museums across the country. There was a catalog that was distributed everywhere. I remember first hearing about Studio Glass and saying, what's that? And someone handed me the catalog. So it happened to be, even though it was kind of late, I mean, 79 already, so much had
But you
happened.
bought artist work out of that show as well,
lot
which
of
I think
artist
made a
work
big
went into the
impact on what
museum's
was going
collection, yeah,
on.
that's
Blame
So
that
that
on
made
Tom Piegner.
Yeah.
And it was amazing how far that money went. A couple of $100 that we made, or even $1,000. My God, it lasted forever. In 1977, I was living on $4,000 for the year with 2 children. So you can imagine how far that money went.
I had one kind of to back up a little bit. I went to school at Bowling Green State University, and you're talking about how programs get started. Of course, that's Nick Labino's stomping grounds. And a design professor there by the name of Carl Hall was good friends with Nick. And I was an undergraduate sculpture assistant. And the sculpture professor took a leave of absence. And while he was gone, the design professor went into the sculpture studio and had a second floor installed back in the back corner of the studio where they built some furnaces. literally stole the space from the sculpture department and got it up and running. And this was in 1966.
That's how it's done.
Yeah.
And that's how it was
That's how it
done.
was
There was
done.
all this sort of like, he's gone, let's get it done. When he comes back, he won't be able to get rid of it. And that program has been active and functioning ever since. So it's kind of an interesting thing the way it's put
So,
together.
we've been talking about past and present, and I wanted to ask you, because I don't want this question to get lost, and it doesn't have to be long, and you can just say words if you want, but I wanted each of you to express what are you proudest of in your own careers. I know it's a hard thing. I don't know if you're proudest of the work you've made, the teaching that you've done, whatever it might be, but I'd be interested to hear what your impressions are.
I thought about that, and I decided that the best way of doing it is to write it down, because that way I can make it clearly. That I saw the potential in Harvey's vision. It became part of the early group of pathfinders of the studio movement. That my activities as a creative artist in the field of glass, especially in the early years, helped others discover the creative potential of glass making. That throughout almost 50 years, in any cycle, my work was my own, carrying always my signature. That I worked ceaselessly to discover new creative avenues, that I brought life to my work with my use of color, that my work in glass held to a high level of aesthetic achievement, that I did not hold on to an idea because it was convenient to do so, and that I always felt held to an ideal of integrity in my work. Whether that's true or not.
That's really nice. Thank you very much.
A ditto. Very nice, Joel. Well, I didn't teach as long as these guys did, and actually, I include.
I didn't mention teaching, by the way.
Well, I know you didn't.
Notice I didn't say
But
anything
I'm getting
about-
back to mentors,
Okay.
who, of course, you are one of, and Marvin in many ways as well. In fact, Joel, I've always thanked Joel for sparing me the duty of going into the jungles of Vietnam, because he got me out of that and into graduate school with him many years ago.
Let me tell you, of all the students I have, my children remember Jack and his dog.
And my dog. Who do they remember first?
I'm not sure.
Well, I had a short teaching career, about a dozen years in the universities, and it feels good to me to have those people show up once in a while and thank me for what I gave them, whatever that was. But I think when I think back about where I'm at today and what I've accomplished, there's a lot of ups. I mean, being included in museum collections like Corning feels really terrific. But when I think about having pride, I think, geez, here I am. It's been 30, 40 years.
That's, I'll tell you, that's about Jack. Jack, I think, is the most underrated artist and least publicized artist that I know. And I'm a champion of him because from early on he decided he was going to be a sculptor, regardless of the consequences, and he's worked at it ever since. Great.
And I made a living at it. And I've
Thanks.
raised 2 children, and I own property, and I'm still here, and I'm still doing it. And to me, that feels real good. And thank you, Joel. Joel's been one of my most wonderful supporters, and
Well, you
his
deserve
beautiful
it.
wife,
If anybody
Beata.
deserves it, you do.
Thank you. So there's a lot that can be included in that question, but,
Yeah, I know.
that's a tough one to cover in a minute or two.
Marvin, Mary's pointing to you. I think she wants to be skipped.
No, I don't want to be skipped. I want to be last.
Okay.
What
Is
was
that
the-
okay with you?
What was the question?
Some of the things, what are some of the things you're most proud of, looking over your career?
Well, it's not for me to judge, it's for others.
But well, there's that. There's
was
that.
thinking of that answer,
Yes,
too.
because your career is in the public realm. But for you personally, what have been some of the things that you felt really good about?
I don't know, just everything that's, Joel was in advertising, so he has to promote his product. He learned. I didn't learn that.
I never learned how to promote my product
Well,
that
you
way.
did. I think you did pretty
No,
well.
I didn't. I
No,
can tell you
okay,
what-
you didn't do very
You know,
well.
I'll tell you, Marvin.
I agree with
I
you.
can
You
tell
didn't do well at all.
I can tell you, Marvin, that
Tell me.
I'll tell you. You brought in a lot of artists from Europe.
You did.
And you made a lot of friends abroad because you saw the value of this kind of international exchange. And that's what I remember. If I remember anything about you, that's it. And I was envious because I didn't have the money to bring the kind of people you brought. And you brought important people from Czechoslovakia, for example, when it meant the world for them to be invited to California. Maybe not to you, but to California at least. but still in all.
Well, that's what I said. It's not for me to judge. It's for other people to. I mean, what am I going to say? You know,
It's true.
yeah, that's right. But it's for other people to judge. I mean, yeah, I've always had an interest in traveling, even when I was young, and I worked at camps far away from home and taught on the waterfront and boating and swimming and things like that, and was a Boy Scout, went to world jamborees, and was interested in the kind of the exchange between people and so forth. And I guess it boiled over into when I became a teacher or what. I don't know what to teach. I don't know what I like to make things. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a maker of things. I never could have done these other things. I know. Never would have made it in school. But I just did what I could do. And I met people, and I thought that other people should meet these people too. And it was always sharing, to share with other people, to share with my students. When I was teaching, I didn't have syllabuses and wonderful speeches, and so I just put things that were written or that I gathered on the wall of the studio. And when someone asked me a question, I said, read the wall. And it was all there. If they took the time and read the wall, all their questions were answered, almost all of them. And so that was my interest in sharing and spreading things around. Just happened. I was no major plan. Wasn't religious. Thank God.
Before Mary answers, I just want to say one thing Italo Scanga told me when I was interviewing for the Pilchuck book. He goes, when you're making history, you don't realize what you're doing. You're just working. You're just doing it. And it's not until later that you really begins to fall into place. And in fact, we're just now, 50 years, really now beginning to understand the whole studio glass phenomenon as a historical phenomenon that has had a beginning and maybe an end.
Yeah, Mary.
And you should also say that knowing history makes a lot of sense too, for the educational people to really try to keep
I
this
wish-
going and teach more about what's going on
wish-
before.
absolutely.
Yes.
I wish history was something, the history of our movement was something that was important enough to be part of any program. Because I have terrible impression that young people aren't interested in history at all. They're just interested in what they're doing. And
Not yet. Not yet.
But they will.
Young people aren't interested in history, but
Okay.
sometime
Yeah.
they will
Long
become
gone, when
more
we're long
interested.
gone, believe me.
Yeah, they will.
Hopefully.
Well, anyhow, what I'd like to be
Mary
remembered
wants the
for-
last word.
Not the last,
No, it's not
not
gonna
the
be
last word, but
Yes, it is.
well, I just want to be remembered for innovation. And as everyone here talked about, when we started out, we really didn't know anything. I mean, when I started slumping, I had no idea about the Hintons or the history or handkerchief glass or that slumping was something that people did. And so what I'd like to be remembered for is the innovation of mid-air slumping, of slumping things in the air because, I mean, we weren't taught that. We just invented as we went. And it's very good to the historians to say, well, this person did this first and that happened. But a lot of things happen spontaneously.
Mary, listen.
Yes.
What you want to be remembered for is not that you are a slumber, but that you made beautiful work.
Okay.
It's the
thank you.
work that counts. It's not the fact that whatever however you made it,
not the process.
with a
Listen to
airplane
Joel.
propeller or what the heck.
You're
You made-
right.
It's the work that
You're
counts.
right. You're
and that's
right.
what they'll look at.
Yeah.
They're going to say, well, how did Mary do that? She said that all of this and so- I mean,
You're right. You're totally right.
You-
Thank you.
You didn't have to carve your name in a tree to be remembered,
Thank you.
you know.
Thanks.
We have just a few more minutes before we should take a break before our next panel. And I think we can take really just one or two questions from the audience, if there are any burning questions out there for our panelists, if you're not afraid to ask.
I'm just very curious because in 1885 to 1930, there was some wonderful Art Nouveau and Art Deco artists. They did fabulous work in Paris. Paris, France was the capital of glass. Is there a learning that was taken from them? Is there a relationship there? Is what was done there linked to what you started here and what you did here
Okay, I'm going to try to repeat or, consolidate that question, which is, I think what you're asking is there have been incredibly amazing times in the period of glass history, the 20s and 30s in Paris, Renaissance Venice, you can go on and on. How important was glass history to you guys? We were just talking about kids don't know history. Did you know history? Did you know glass history? I think that you were interested in it.
Harvey collected a lot.
He did,
And I
to
think,
show
from my point of view, I
students,
wasn't
yeah.
a student of his, but he introduced a lot of that to his students, and
He
some
did.
of those people went out and collected. And I saw from my perspective that Harvey brought that history into his classroom through collecting arts and talking about the Europeans in general. So anyhow.
it just inspired me. I mean, the quality of that work. And Maurice Martineau. Maurice Martineau, there's a movie, a wonderful movie on Maurice Martineau working in the glass factory. Now, what he was doing was exactly what I was doing at my glass factory. He'd have his lunch pail, he'd come in, and he's working during lunch hour. And strangely enough, the way that he was working was that there was somebody helping him, but you never saw that person.
No.
So the impression was that he was doing it all by himself. But seeing that movie and knowing his work, that was fantastic for me. I mean, it was really inspirational. And the Art Deco and the Art Nouveau movement were exceptional, not to copy, but to inspire what artists can do with the material.
I think it went back a lot further than that, hundreds of years before that. I bored with Art Nouveau. All the other artists who picked it up, painting, sculpture, what have you. But the beginnings, the early work were just wonderful. Fritz will agree with that. Look, going to museums, and the Art Nouveau isn't really what a lot of the people look at. It's the really early pieces when they didn't have propane and whatever, and they were marvelous, and the forms were marvelous.
Like Roman glass, do you mean? Like ancient
Sure.
Roman?
Yeah, way back.
Art Nouveau kind of mishmashed it all up. If you make it confusing enough, then you won't have to answer questions.
yeah.
I've just been given the old, crook of the neck, so we will have to end our panel. Our next panel will start promptly at 3 o'clock, which is in 5 minutes. For those of you who need a bio break, please take one. Thank you to our panelists.
Thank you, guys.